Final Fantasy is without question the biggest JRPG series in the world, with over 35 years now of releases in both their mainline series of games as well as little side games in between. You know, I was first exposed to the series through Final Fantasy II, or Final Fantasy IV as it was actually known, insert rant about the naming confusion, blah blah blah. But with 16 mainline titles, sequels, remakes, and side games aplenty, there's a lot to love from the series. So here I'm going to give you guys here on the first episode of Rewind with Radical, my personal top 10 Final Fantasy games of all time. Now, I'm going to say right off the bat, this one, Final Fantasy VII, the original, not going to be on here for two reasons. One, I prefer the remake above the original, and I don't want to double up on essentially similar games here. But two, honestly, and you might crucify me for this, I'm not as big a fan as the original as everyone else was. It's not a bad game, but if I was going to have to put it on the list, it might not even crack the top 10 if I was not putting this rule in. Also, keep in mind, there may be some spoilers in some of these, but they are 20-plus-year-old games, so, you know, you've been warned. Okay? Let's go. This one hurts a little to only put it at number 10, and that's because I genuinely love the world of Final Fantasy XII and its characters. Ivalice is a perfect setting for a Final Fantasy game, and there's plenty of characters to love, from Balthier and Fran, Bosch and Ash, hell, I don't even actually mind Penelo and Vaughn either. The game is fun to play, the dungeons are super cool, and I do enjoy the pseudo-MMORPG traversal and combat, especially with the idea of the Gambit system, where you can preset what your characters will do in certain situations. However, what holds it back from going any deeper into this list is the fact that I couldn't tell you a damn thing about the story aside from evil nation comes in and takes over your home country. I've played through the game 3 separate times over the years, and every single time I finish it, I have the same thought. I've really enjoyed my time with this, but I couldn't tell you a thing about it except how awesome Balthier and Fran are. I will say though, at least the addition of speeding up the traversal and combat in the Zodiac Age makes things way better in the long run. So if you've never played Final Fantasy XII, I strongly suggest you play the Zodiac Age over the original. There's going to be some of you watching this video absolutely livid that this game isn't higher on the list, but there's a pretty simple reason that Final Fantasy XIV isn't any higher on the list for me. I'm honestly just not the biggest fan of MMORPGs. This is the closest one, mind you, that has ever gotten to stick with me, and quite honestly, if it didn't require me to have a monthly subscription to play deeper into the game, I would have probably stuck with it. But instead I played through the free trial, and honestly, I have to say that I can see why this was the one that finally was able to go toe-to-toe with World of Warcraft and survive all these years later. The world is absolutely stunning to walk around, and out of all the MMORPGs I've played with this type of combat, it's the one that really clicked the most for me. I enjoy playing around with the different classes, but eventually settled on being a rogue so I could work my way up to being a ninja. Speaking of rogues, shout out to all the Linza Laminza starters out there. But yeah, while I enjoyed my time in the free trial, a mixture of the constant fetch quests and eventually getting tired of the same thing over and over again caused me to stop before I would need to subscribe going forward. But this is in no way me saying the game is bad, but more it's not for me as a long-term option. But if you're into MMORPGs and you've somehow not given this one a try, you definitely should. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of you are going, really? The Final Fantasy game for babies major cut? And yeah, it did. Yes, it's an extremely easy game, but that's also part of why I'm so fond of it over these years. This was the first Final Fantasy game I ever beat, since I never owned a copy, and finishing the other SNES ones was impossible back in the old rental days, so a game like Mystic Quest was a lot easier to actually finish. And being a kid, this was a much more approachable game than the others. Not to say that they weren't approachable, but Mystic Quest for a young kid like me was way easier to figure out and master. The game has also some amazing little things that really stand out. One of my favorite things is how the enemy sprites change as you get closer and closer to defeating them. It really makes you feel like what you are doing carries weight. I also like how you move around the map and have various items to add onto the traversal like the axe, bombs, and the dragon claw. And also, there's an argument to be had that Mystic Quest has the best default battle music in the entire franchise, which is saying a lot. While Mystic Quest isn't the most expansive game in the series, it's one that still holds a place in my heart over all these years. And if you've got a little time and want something chill to beat, this is a great option as it should only take you no longer than 15 hours to beat. You'll be seeing its predecessor further down this list, which is in part due to why the sequel to Final Fantasy X also ranks so high on my list. Final Fantasy X-2, if you believe me or not, is the first game that I was ever full-on hyped up for and bought with my own money, being a young pimple-faced 15-year-old who had just recently started working and had spending cash to buy their own games. I even went as far as playing Unlimited Saga, which is a terrible game, just for the demo of Final Fantasy X-2. X-2 is more of what I loved about the original, but with the added job system. Granted, there are a few dress spheres that take the majority of your time, like the Dark Knight and Mascot, but regardless of that, it's fun to have the ability to customize the 3 girls however you like to fit your style of gameplay. And on that note, I actually really like the very small cast of party members here. It means everyone gets a chance in the spotlight, and there isn't one character you get late in the game that you never use. Pain, mind you, still isn't the greatest, but it is what it is, considering how Yuna and Riku are more than able to balance that out. The story also isn't the greatest either, but to be honest, it's the vibes in this game that really sold it for me on this one. I would honestly love another turn-based RPG like this that's more of a goofy comedy action sort of vibe to cleanse the palate once in a while. Complete with dance numbers, of course. I wish Square would just finally show us something about the Final Fantasy IX remake that has been rumored for what feels like a decade now. I want to be able to take a fresh look at this game again, as I want to go back and re-experience the story and these lovable characters again, as I've tried to go back and play the original, and to be honest, replaying most PlayStation 1 games just don't seem to click with me anymore, no matter how much I loved them growing up. Final Fantasy IX, though, was a return to form after Final Fantasy VIII's, in my opinion, horrendous junction system. Having a game that felt more like the old school Final Fantasy games was a real selling point for me. It genuinely felt like I was playing a SNES Final Fantasy game again, but in 3D. The characters are great, Phoebe of course is best boy, the story is pretty good, at least until you get closer to the end. The first half of the game is fantastic. And the addition of Tetramaster as a follow-up to Triple Triad, while not as good, is still a great minigame. My only complaint is the trance system, which you cannot control when it triggers, which kind of is annoying when you know it always does it against the weakest enemies. But hopefully with a remake on the way, we can re-experience this game with the improvements it needs and just show how truly great this game was. Okay, you folks are going to ask me to return my Final Fantasy fan card. I, haven't played the original Final Fantasy Tactics. I know, I missed out on it back in the day, and I've been hoping for some sort of remaster or remake over the years, but as we all know, Square Enix either doesn't give us what we want, or it takes them 10 plus years to finally do it. But I've played the second installment in the series, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance for the Game Boy Advance, and I gotta say, it's really freaking good. Once again, I cannot state how much I love Ivalice as a setting, and the very colorful designs of the maps and characters really shine in this one. And I just realized as I'm writing this part of the script out that this may be the first time I actually played an isekai game, as the main character and his friends get sucked into this fantasy world. It's also a great little story about dealing with misfortunes in real life and how to accept and overcome them. It's a nice little strategy game that isn't too difficult and has the right amount of customization with the job system to make it a game that I often still come back to this day. You know, Square, people would really love to see another one of these. It's not like you're not making tactics games, you just decided that apparently the name has to be something different. So get on it! Hey, look at that, we managed to have a numbered game in the same numbered slot. But yeah, Final Fantasy IV holds a special place in my heart because it's the first one I ever played. Yes, it's on the easier side compared to others in the series, but much like Mystic Quest, it makes this so much more approachable, and I would strongly suggest this to folks newer to JRPGs. It's aged extremely well, much like most SNES games over the years. The battle system is straightforward, there's no complicated level up system, the majority of the bosses are really easy to understand, and the dungeons are all really cool. Except for the Cave of Monsters, and if you were like me as a kid, you didn't realize the float spell would solve all your problems. I absolutely love this cast of characters, even if they constantly betray me or die for all of an hour before they reappear, having somehow survived. The story is pretty good for its time, though it's nothing to write home about nowadays. What really has helped it stand the test of time for me is its simplicity. There's no ridiculously complicated systems, it's just go through the dungeon, beat the boss, get the item that gets you to the next place. And it's also served really well for randomizers, which I have been heavily involved with. Shout out to the Final Fantasy IV free enterprise community. If you've ever been interested in playing a randomizer, this is in my opinion the best one of any Final Fantasy game, so check it out. But while Final Fantasy IV has the most nostalgia with me as my first one, there are still 3 games above it. At one point, this was my favorite Final Fantasy of all time. If there was any game in this series I have the most fond memories of, it's this one. It was the first one I played in my teenage years, where I could definitely pull a lot more from the story of these games, and Final Fantasy X certainly does that, with a plot full of sadness and loss, mixed in with some real high points and funny moments. This game has my favorite cast of characters, and Kimahri. The standouts for me are of course Yuna, but also Riku and Auron. You've got a great mix of party members, both in classes and personalities. The world of Spira is also a fantastic setting, starting out with a more cheerful island vibe before moving into the darker settings like the Thunder Plains and Xanarkand. The story is also fantastic, at least until the very end, at least in my opinion. Look, I love this game all the way until the near end, where it's revealed that you are nothing more than a dream, and once the mission is over, you will fade away. It really brings you down and makes the stakes at the end basically inconsequential. This is honestly why I had to remove it from number 1. Granted, I'm still got other reasons why number 1 is number 1, but this game is still in a way my personal favorite, but I just can't consider it the best. It doesn't end strong for me, whereas the final 2 on this list do. But make no mistake, this is an incredible game and laid down an incredible foundation for voice-acted JRPGs going forward. But Square, I'm still waiting for that standalone Blitzball game. I don't care if I'm the only one that wants it. Like I said at the top of this video, I wasn't the biggest fan of the original Final Fantasy VII. It's not bad, but it didn't click for me all that much. If I was going to place it on this list, it likely would have been somewhere around 10th or 9th. But the first remake? Ooh boy, that's a whole different ballgame. I went into this game expecting to either feel the same as I did about the original, or maybe give it a little more props now that I'm much older. And instead it was so freaking good that it's number 2 on my list. A lot of my complaints went away in this game compared to the original. I adore this cast of characters now, especially non-party members, shout out to Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse. But the game from beginning to end is filled with great moments, both serious and silly. The combat is solid, the side quests don't feel like a waste of time, unlike Rebirth, and the world just feels so much more fleshed out. And when the story takes a bit of a different turn compared to the original as well, it added the idea of not knowing what was going to happen next, now to a game I already know the basic path of the story on. Ending this first chapter in the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy, I had no idea where the story was going to go now. I had a rough idea based on the original story, but now things were going to be different, and that was exciting. It's a real shame that Rebirth's excessive open world and honestly disappointing end to the second part have really put a sour note on this trilogy for the time being, but hopefully it can end strong in the third part. But this first chapter all the way through was an absolute blast for me, and honestly the first time I've truly enjoyed a Final Fantasy game from beginning to end since Final Fantasy X-2. Before Final Fantasy VII Remake, Final Fantasy X and VI were constantly fighting each other for first. 10 was my personal favorite, but 6 was the better overall package. Now having decided that the later stages of Final Fantasy X are enough to set it back, Final Fantasy VI is, in my opinion, the best Final Fantasy game of all time. I basically have no complaints about this game. It's aged wonderfully. It has arguably the best soundtrack in the entire series. The world is incredible. The majority of the characters are memorable and full of personality, and the story in this game is without question the best story in all of Final Fantasy, and in my opinion, it's not even close. It's a story filled with tragedy and loss, hardships and despair, but also moments of happiness and triumph, and some low-key super funny moments as well. The opera scene remains one of the most recognized moments in this franchise. Opening credits set the tone for what will be an epic yet darker game than you're used to. And then there's Kefka. Without question, the greatest villain in not just Final Fantasy, but in my opinion, all JRPGs throughout gaming history. You think he's nothing more than the recurring henchman boss, before the tone completely shifts and becomes the maniacal ruler of the entire world, literally splitting the continent in half. That's right, he actually wins. You fail to stop him. And it makes the second half of the game even better than the first, as you go around essentially an open world now, trying to recollect all of your party members, assuming you even choose to try and find them all. The combat system is fantastic as well, especially in the first half of the game, before admittedly espers start to really take over and you create a party of world-destroying mages. Edgar's tools, Sabine's blitz, Cyan's sword techs, there's a lot of unique mechanics that are really cool in there. Not everyone's created equally, mind you. Strago, Realm, Umaru, and Gogo come to mind, but there's plenty of other party members for you to attach to instead. My personal top 3 are Shadow, Locke, and Terra. I could go on and on and on about how much I love this game, but to wrap things up, to me there's really only one game in the entire series I would consider to be perfect. Does this mean it has zero flaws? Of course not, no such game exists, but any flaws Final Fantasy VI have are out of sight and out of mind almost immediately. If there was only one game I could suggest newcomers to the series to play, it has to be Final Fantasy VI. No ifs, ands, or buts. Thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. This is the start of a series I'm going to be doing called Rewind with Radical, where I take a look at games in the past and talk about them in different ways. Now, not all of these videos may be top 10s. I'll definitely be isolating a single game or maybe even a single moment or character and talk about them at length. But I figure if there was anything to start with, it's talking about my favorite JRPG series ever. Well, at least until Trails took that spot, which you can check out that video on the channel as well. I'll link that in the description. But don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel for more content. You can check out our link tree, which is linked in the description, where you can join our Discord, follow us on social media, or check out where you can find the Pixel Play podcast, which posts every Wednesday. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.